Let's go.
All right. Here come folks now. Welcome in, everybody. If you
Welcome.
If you wouldn't mind, as you're joining, popping your name and where you're calling in from into the chat, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom window. That way we can kind of get the conversation started. I'll just wait a few minutes, or a minute or two, really, before I give my opening housekeeping spiel. But welcome in, everybody. And just to get the conversation started, thank you, Alicia. So Alicia is calling in from Medina, Ohio. That's just down the road from us. Gary is in Mentor and I am in Cleveland Heights. Cheryl is joining us from Wilmington, North Carolina. Welcome in, Cheryl. Awesome to have you. Corey, hello. Joining us, representing SIRCAP, but in Alton, Missouri. Okay, great. Yep. Awesome.
Portugal.
Eric.
Michael.
Portugal. There you go. Great.
Porto. Yep. Eric
is joining us from New Bern, North Carolina. Great. A lot of North Carolinians here. That's awesome to see. Fantastic. All right. Well, let me open things up here just a little bit before we get started. Today's presentation, we're going to go for about an hour. Thank you for whomever asked for those closed captions.
Nigel, welcome.
Welcome, Nigel. Welcome. We will be recording this, as you hopefully heard as you're starting. So feel free to sit back, relax, and take it all in. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, comments, concerns throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat. If you've joined us in the past, we're changing the format up a little bit. I'll be on the entire time and I'll be interjecting with Gary throughout just to clarify points and whatnot. But then we're also going to pause for Q&A discussion twice, if I'm not mistaken, Gary, throughout. So yes, and in case I didn't say it, hi, everybody, I'm Nick Hool, and I'll be kind of running point here for this webinar presentation. But looking at the time, I know we've got a lot of information to get through and a lot of good conversation to have. So Gary, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Nick. And I just want to say also welcome to Satish, who is phoning in from Ahmedabad, India. So I think, Satish, you get the prize for coming the furthest. And Brigitte from Austria. Wow, this is great to see. Folks from around the world. Lee from Danville, Illinois, welcome. Also,
awesome.
Lots of exciting things. I'm going to be, where am I going to be in Illinois next?
Decatur.
Decatur, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know where I'm going. It's just you guys tell me where to go. I get on the plane and go. But anyway, thank you all for joining the webinar. I'm excited to have you all here. I want to do just a quick overview of our work around the entrepreneurial mindset. I always, and Jamie Pinger, welcome, Jamie, welcome back, I should say, glad you're here. I want to give a brief overview of our work. I want to engage you in some dialogue and let's just go from there. So I'm going to jump in, I'm going to share my screen with you. And as Nick said, I'll pause a couple times throughout. Let me get going here. So, Nick, okay, you can see the screen?
Yep.
So we're all about cultivating entrepreneurial mindsets in classrooms, organizations, and communities. That's kind of who we are. That's what we do. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We are the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset education, training, and professional development. That's a quick overview who we are and what we do. The questions that I'd like to address in this webinar are, what is an entrepreneurial mindset? Let's try to get zero in on that. Why is it important? Where does it come from? And how can we develop it in ourselves and others? And so those are some of the questions I want to dig into today. And I'm coming from this basic premise that the world has changed in ways that now require all of us to think like entrepreneurs, regardless of whether or not we're going to start a business, that these are the attitudes and skills the world now demands. And what I'm also saying is that, for most of us, the entrepreneurial mindset is not well understood. The underlying causes of entrepreneurial behavior are not well understood. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get to. And suffice it to say that when we look at entrepreneurials, and I'm using that word, I'm emphasizing the IALS, to say that we have to think about entrepreneurship more broadly than just people who start a business, right? But the point that I want to make here is that when we look at entrepreneurial people, what we see are people who are creative and critical thinkers. They're resilient, they're resourceful, they know how to mobilize resources and make things happen amidst complexity and dynamism and change. And when we look at entrepreneurial people, what we see are the characteristics that we need to not only develop in ourselves, but in our children, in our systems of education, in our students, in our workforce, in our communities. And ultimately what we see is that to be entrepreneurial is essentially to become future-proof. And as I'm saying here, there's unlimited global demand for people who can think like entrepreneurs. Employers are increasingly recognizing these are the attitudes and skills they want. They can teach, they can train for the technical skills. It's the underlying entrepreneurial attitudes and skills that are needed in classrooms, in organizations, and communities. And so what I want to put together here very briefly, I'm not going to get into this in any depth that I can, but I still want to land these ideas in ways that are helpful to you all. And so the first idea that I want to talk about is redefining entrepreneurship in a way that everyone can embrace. I mean, that's really the starting point. And as I said a minute ago, we've got to expand our thinking about entrepreneurship beyond someone who just starts a business. When we look at the current definitions of entrepreneurship, they basically haven't changed in 200 or 300 years. It's still, you look up the term entrepreneur or entrepreneurship, it's going to say someone who starts a business in exchange for a profit. Well, that's highly misleading. And part of my research has been the interviewing of hundreds of entrepreneurs. And what we find is that they're just not always motivated by money. There's a purpose-driven component. And so, but more broadly, I want you to leave this webinar thinking differently about entrepreneurship beyond just the startup realm. But the second important idea I want to delve into a little bit is, what is a mindset? Like, we all use that term, but what does that really mean? And I've come to believe that mindset is 99% of our work, and that the entrepreneurial part is just the last 1%. So I want to, talk about, dig into our mindset as this hidden mechanism that influences our behavior largely without our awareness. Those are the two ideas I want to embrace. I'm going to start with a brief redefinition of entrepreneurship. So a big problem we see in this space is that, our ability to embrace these ideas is limited by the ways in which we define entrepreneurship. And well, a lot of people hear that word and they think it conjures the image of the billionaire class, high growth technology entrepreneurs. And There's nothing wrong with that per se. The point that I want to make is that the venture-backed high-growth entrepreneurs are so far outside of the norm. The former head of research at the Kauffman Foundation once told me, and I forgot the number, I've written it down somewhere, but it's a small fraction of a single percent of all new businesses created in the US are created with venture capital. More importantly, those that tend to fail at a much higher rate than more organic entrepreneurs. The typical entrepreneur starts with a few hundred or a few $1,000s. So we got to kind of get that out of the way. But the point I will make here is that if we think of the entrepreneur as these great men, or women, these people that come up with brilliant ideas, showered in venture capital, creating thousands or tens of thousands of jobs, this is sort of steeped in the great man theories of the last century that tend to skew our thinking about who can be an entrepreneur and about how to be an entrepreneur. And in my research, what I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years is interviewing every day what I call unlikely entrepreneurs. These are people who start with little or nothing, yet somehow manage to succeed. And what we found has led to a radical rethinking of entrepreneurship that has implications for how we think about learning and work. It's got broad implications for the way we think about success and about who can be entrepreneurial. So one thing I'd like to do here is make a distinction between entrepreneurial attitudes and skills, entrepreneurial mindsets, and managerial mindsets. And I see them as the different sides of the same coin. And what I'm saying here is that we need both. That in the past, the managerial framework was sufficient in order to succeed. And now I'm saying it's necessary, but it's no longer sufficient. We need entrepreneurial attitudes and managerial. And to dig into that, I'm going to do a quick overview of this concept called transformation theory, which was developed by this guy named Dr. George Land. And he developed this theory as a way to explain the nature of change within any living system, be it an animal, a human being, a group, a culture, a community, a company, whatever. So what Land is saying is that there are three inescapable phases of change. There's a discovery phase, which is then followed by a growth phase, which is ultimately followed by an obsolescence phase. And in some cases, the obsolescence phase is the reinvention phase. In some cases, it's the obsolescence phase. But
just to point, sorry,
ahead.
Gary,
No.
just to point out, Gary, if you haven't already noticed, is going to be dropping a lot of references. I'll be doing my best to put links to those books and papers where relevant in the chat. So be sure to be watching there too if you're interested in learning more.
Thank you, Nick. So what Land is saying is that each of these three phases requires distinct rules for survival. And they're not interchangeable. That's the key, right? So he calls these orange dots are what Land called breakpoints. They're the moments in time when the rules for survival change. But it's easy to illustrate here with an orange dot, but in real life, we don't get orange dots showing up in our inbox. It's much less obvious in real life. So That's the basic premise of transformation theory is this. Each of the three phases requires distinct rules for survival. And the inability to recognize that is a classic definition of what it means to be maladaptive, right? Because the rules for survival and discovery do not work in the growth phase. And the rules for survival in the growth phase don't apply to either the obsolescence phase or the reinvention phase. So the key to survival is to know which phase you are in so you know which mindset to apply. So what does that look like for most of us mere mortals? Well, we go through this exploration phase, and we usually do that. That happens largely within formal learning environments where we learn how to make ourselves useful to other humans. And I should back up and say, you know, we all live by exchanging useful things with each other. And most of us learn how to become useful in organized, formal learning environments. And that's where the exploration occurs. And then the first breakpoint occurs. We graduate from college, we go off out into the workforce, and we now replicate the useful thing that we learned in the discovery phase. We go out in the world, we advance in our careers, we climb the organizational ladder, we gain seniority, and then we hit the second break point. And that occurs when the growth starts to slow. Now, that could be the growth is slowing because you're nearing retirement and you're just aging out of the system. The growth could start to slow because of changes in the environment. Shift happens, right? The usefulness of the useful thing that we discovered in the first phase is becoming less relevant or less useful because of technological advancement or other, competitors or other environmental factors. So the growth starts to slow. We're either fading into retirement or obsolescence, or we're asked to reinvent and start anew. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the wheels tend to fall off the wagon. And this is really the brilliance of Land's theory. What Land points out is nothing fails like success. That the attitudes and skills that were essential for success in column 2 will now prevent us. They become so deeply embedded in our mindset that they prevent us from adapting in the face of change. And that's where the entrepreneurial mindset becomes relevant. So the big question is this: how do we learn to make ourselves useful to other humans outside of known systems? How do we learn how to make ourselves useful without the guidance of a professional teacher, without the benefit of a predetermined path and a predictable outcome? That's where the entrepreneurial mindset is really, really important. Now, to be fair, entrepreneurs often fail. And Jamie, you've probably seen this as an attorney who works in the intellectual property space. Entrepreneurs often fail because they don't know to switch gears. They like to invent and experiment, but they don't know when it's time to stop experimenting and start replicating, right? So, but the point being here, and I am really skimming over this, is that I redefine entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And that by creating value for others, we can empower ourselves. Now, let's break that down for a minute, right? Most of us are engaged in other directed value creation. We work in larger established companies where someone else has figured out what needs to be done, and we're encouraged to follow predetermined processes and procedures. And that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But as the world continues to change, like, leaders can't keep up. And all of us need to develop these attitudes and skills. But I'm also saying that by creating value for others, we empower ourselves, not just economically, but we empower ourselves by leveraging our interests and abilities in ways that contribute to the greater good. We become optimally engaged. We tap into a very potent form of human motivation called intrinsic motivation, and thus empowering ourselves. So, point number one, it's the redefinition of entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And by doing so, we can empower ourselves. So the question becomes, what is the useful thing that you are exchanging? With whom do you exchange it? And more importantly, what is preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? Those are really the underlying mindset questions that I'd like to address in the comments and discussions moving forward. But the last thing I'll say about this before I move on is really straightforward. I like this definition of entrepreneurship because anyone can embrace it. You can start out of high school with a minimum wage job in a fast food restaurant. And if you embrace this idea that it's up to me to figure out how to maximize my usefulness to other humans, opportunities will find you. You can apply this in the most menial of jobs. You can apply this to someone who wants to change the world, and everyone in between. It's a universal definition that anyone can embrace. So, okay, next point. Let's talk about the mindset, right? You know, it took me a long time to really wrap my head around what a mindset is. And I scoured the literature. I really couldn't find any solid clinical definition of what a mindset is and how it functions, until I started looking at the literature in culture and organizational culture and the work of Edgar Schein. And I realized that a mindset is to a person what culture is to a group. Functions exactly the same. I'll say it again. A mindset is to a person what culture is to a group. And so I'll use this definition of culture from Edgar Schein, in which he described it as a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. Culture are the unwritten rules that we abide to function as a group, short form. So I took Schein's definition of culture and spun it as a pattern of values, beliefs, and assumptions learned by an individual that worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore assumed to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. That's it. That's a definition of mindset. Now, let me dig into that a little deeper, right? So our mindset, even before I get into that, I want to stop and say that the purpose of a mindset like culture is to enable us to function without really thinking. It enables us to think without thinking. So our brains are inundated with billions of bits of data that pour in through our 5 senses every second. And our brains can only grasp of a handful of those bits of data. So our brains have to filter out everything deemed non-threatening or irrelevant. And as part of that overload, our brains are always seeking to automate everything. So once we learn something and we assume it to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel, our brains automate that schema in order to reduce the cognitive load. So our brains are constantly trying to automate everything so that we can function, we can reduce the cognitive load and save that cognitive load for dealing with threats or other anomalies in our life. So there's two basic aspects of a mindset that I want to draw your attention to. And the first is that our mindset regulates our ability to optimize our inherent capabilities. So we learn things early in life and they become habitual patterns of thought that lead to habitual patterns of behavior. And we assume these to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. And sometimes those mindsets, those patterns of belief can inhibit, sometimes they can enhance our ability to adapt and thrive in our environment. The way Warren Buffett put it is that, you got a guy over here with a 400 horsepower engine, but he only knows how to get 100 horsepower out of his engine. And you got a guy over here, he's got a 200 horsepower engine, but he knows how to get all 200 horsepower out of his engine. He's better off than the guy with the 400 horsepower engine. That's what I see in these everyday entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily the sharpest tools in the shed in terms of, at least as measured by academic or traditional means. But they're aware of their own thinking. They think about their own thinking. And there's research to support this. They're more likely to think about their own thinking in ways that enable them to optimize whatever inherent capabilities they have. But the other component of a mindset that we're concerned with is the ways in which our mindset tends to hinder our ability to adapt in the face of change. And that really lies in understanding the difference between an adaptive challenge and a technical problem. And I won't get into that too much right now.
One real quick, Gary, but you can stay on this slide though. I just want to highlight that if you're aware of Carol Dweck's work on mindset, her fixed versus growth, that's very similar to what we're talking about, but we are expanding upon those definitions that she put forth, which are very valuable and are actually a component of the work that we do, but we're taking it a step further because growth and fixed has more to do with your perceptions of your ability to achieve a particular goal or learn about a particular subject. And we're taking it a step further that Gary will get into in a moment. I just wanted to highlight that if anyone's noticing some comparables there.
Yeah. And Dweck, thank you for that, Nick. And Dweck herself, she describes a mindset as a way of thinking. It's just that there's not enough meat there. And it just caused me to keep digging until I could come up with something a little more useful, a more useful framework. But here I've accentuated the mindset. Like this becomes a fixed way of thinking that creates a very powerful incentive to draw from the past in order to navigate the future. A mindset, it becomes a fixed way of thinking. So from an evolutionary perspective, our mindset is a feature when the future looks like the past. You just get better and better, more expedient at dealing with and solving problems because they become more familiar, become more skilled, you become better and better at it. So from an evolutionary perspective, our mindset benefits us. It becomes a feature when the future is looking like the past. However, our mindset becomes a bug in the face of adaptive change. That's the real mindset dilemma. So from an evolutionary perspective, it hinders our ability to adapt in a changing environment. So I use Edgar Schein's model of a mindset here. I find it useful. There's the iceberg analogy. At level 1 are the visible artifacts and observable behaviors. And I guess I'd like to pause here and just say that my research and my work more broadly in understanding the underlying causes of entrepreneurial behavior are rooted more in anthropology and ethnography than they are as a business-oriented understanding. I'm looking at this as a behavioral phenomenon. So back to the mindset model. On the surface are the visible artifacts and observable behaviors. I mean, I said that for the benefit of those of you who might have anthropological training. Beneath the surface is where we find our explicit knowledge and our espoused values, what we know that we know, what we say that we value. But as we all have heard, like what you say, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. That's not because of a moral failure, it's because of a cognitive glitch. That at the base of the iceberg, beneath our conscious awareness, are these deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions of which we're largely unaware. And more importantly, what shows up on the surface is much more likely to be the result of our deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions than it is to be of our level 2 knowledge and values, right? So what I'm saying here is that a mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes it creates. A mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcome it creates. That's really the big idea. And what we encourage in our trainings and workshops and so forth, is when things are going wrong or you're stuck in some sort of adverse conditions, the tendency is to blame or look externally to attribution. In psychology or behavioral economics, this is called the self-serving bias. We take credit for things that go properly in our lives. We ascribe them to level 2, and we tend to blame when things go wrong. And it's not, again, necessarily because of a moral failure. It's because we're not aware of our level 3 values and assumptions and how they might be contributing to the outcomes that we say we don't want. So I'm going to pause here, Nick. I see quite a bit of activity in the chat, although
yes,
I'm trying not to look
I'm
at
having
it.
Quite an interesting, multifaceted conversation with Michael Meeks here, and I wanted to get you to weigh in on a few points. Let me go back to his first question. Many of them are interrelated, though. So he says definitions do matter. Going back to first principles, how are entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial behavior unique? What is entrepreneurship? And it was entrepreneurial. Okay, wait, maybe I'm missing that part. Is it a combo? Are they one and the same? And that was kind of the argument I was saying, is we largely don't like to make the distinction between quote unquote true entrepreneurship and being entrepreneurial. When someone uses the word entrepreneurship, they often mean someone who started a business and followed lean startup methodology, things like that. We're saying you can apply that logic to any area of your life, with the importance of empowering yourself, taking more agency in all actions that you're doing. And then he also says, how is this different than effectual mindset? And I was drawn to my conversation with him, so I apologize, Gary, if you did mention causal versus effectual.
I did not.
Okay, so I'll talk about that, and then Gary, please expand upon what I'm saying. So a researcher named Sarah Sarasvathy, I'll find an article of hers and drop it in the chat in a moment here, developed this distinction between causal versus effectual reasoning. Causal being knowing as much as you possibly can about whatever thing it is you want to do before you go, versus effectual, meaning you go out and start gathering data and start testing things in the smallest iterative possible fashion in order to go forth. And that's how you will know. So you go out more like a scientist experimenting rather than a researcher looking at existing data sets. There might be some relevant data, but you won't know if it's relevant until you start testing the idea. So that's really our distinction here is yes, the effectual mindset goes in. But Gary, I've been talking a lot, so feel free.
Well, just backing up one thing, to kind of back up a couple steps here.
Yep.
I think the entrepreneurial mindset only appears enigmatic to us to the extent that we are steeped in managerial thinking. So let me start with that. That's a cultural lesson there. You can't understand someone else's mindset until you realize that you have a mindset, that you are looking at the world through a lens. And so that's an important.
It is. I will say Michael specifically is bringing up many different kinds of mindsets. So I think that's a very important distinction for the rest of the audience to understand. But Michael later on brought up a variety, strategic mindsets, cultural, athletic, financial, lean startup methodologies, and the mindsets associated with that. And I guess he's asking for more specificity as to how we are distinct from that. And Michael, I haven't answered that in the chat yet, but I'll just go ahead and insert that there is quite a lot of alignment between the work that we do and lean startup, but where we're distinct is that broad applicability that Gary brought up earlier, while also not simply focusing on creating high growth firms from an idea. This is something that's iterative. It's a slow hunch, if you're aware of Stephen Johnson's work on that. And it's something that can be applied to anyone. Thinking back to transformation theory that Gary was going through a moment ago, that's a simplified version of it, but we're all going through multiple S curves. That's what that table is called in our lives. In school, we're going through some version of a discovery phase, although we could argue we aren't. And then moving on from there, you're discovering things constantly at work, especially with the shift in technology these days. So I just want to hark on what we are talking about is to use the Desmond Tutu analogy. We're trying to talk about going upstream.
Yeah, of the startup.
Exactly. Yeah. We
Yeah.
will, of course, likely see more startups come from this, but that's not the singular goal of the work that we're talking about.
Yeah, and we don't claim to own the term mindset, Michael. Where I'm just saying there's an unlimited number of constructs that fall under the umbrella of mindset. I'm just trying to make the distinction between entrepreneurial mindset is focused on the discovery of useful things, where the managerial mindset is focused on the exploitation of a known useful thing. And it's important that those of us who are in the business of encouraging this behavior in others, we need to get that right, because so many of these efforts are really teaching managerial so many of the entrepreneurship education efforts that exist around the world are of limited value, in part because they are being taught through a managerial lens.
For a
That's
little
where
more.
the promotion of the business planning,
Yes.
the pursuit of resources, they're treating the startup as if it were a smaller version of a large corporation. And those aren't really effective for the typical entrepreneur.
Yes. Yes.
So that's really the distinction. I think that's worth making here.
Absolutely. And if anyone else has comments too, feel free to drop those in, and we can either talk about them now or later on. But Michael also asked a great question here, a little bit more on the mindset piece. Do you equate knowledge to beliefs? For example, we have an idea, and with some evidence, we might develop a belief. With more evidence, we have a conviction. Is mindset at the conviction level, bottom level 3 of the iceberg?
I don't make that distinction in mindset. We do, however, advocate that people who are tasked with supporting entrepreneurial activity encourage people to abide by the scientific method. That is to start with, and I'll get into that a little more. It's really about, you're starting with a hypothesis where the novice entrepreneur shows up all excited about an idea as if it's a foregone conclusion. And that's where the problems arise.
Yes.
And so, as Nick said, we want them to go upstream and prove the concept using the scientific method. Now, as facilitators of this kind of opportunity discovery, what we're advocating is the use of Socratic questioning. We must relinquish our role as subject matter experts. We can start by saying, like, look, this is a discovery process. This isn't about plan and pitch. This is an evidence-based, iterative, experimental process. And, what's important here is this. I'll wrap this up here and we'll move on. Like, managerial paradigms are important. I don't want that to be lost. Managerial beliefs and mindsets and paradigms are essential for efficiency, the efficient distribution and replication of known useful things. It's really important. But what we have to understand as educators, as thought leaders, as people who are developing entrepreneurs, is that those managerial paradigms are not conducive. The level 3 values, go back to the iceberg, the level 3 values and assumptions of the managerial mindset are rooted in efficiency. And efficiency is at odds with discovery. Those two things are like, there's a tension there. So managerial paradigms are about efficiency, about productivity. They are essentially error-reducing paradigms. By contrast, entrepreneurial paradigms are error-inducing. They require lots of errors, an iterative experimental process. And yes, Michael, it's efficiency versus effectiveness. It's essentially that, and we need both. So, Nick, I'm going to keep going. I don't see
looking at time. Let's look at time. Yes, let's keep going. And Michael, thank you for the very thoughtful conversation and chat. This has been great.
Yep. It's amazing how time flies here. How do I make that go away? Let me stop my screen sharing here for a second. I got to make the chat go away, Nick. Sorry.
You should be able to click if there's an X.
There we go. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ice House method. Now, we've trained thousands of facilitators around the world. We've created a curriculum. Our training is curriculum agnostic. I just want to kind of lay out what we call the Ice House method. This came out of research of the observation and analysis of hundreds and hundreds of everyday, what we call unlikely entrepreneurs or underdog entrepreneurs. These are people who don't have big ideas. They're not, creative geniuses who came out of Stanford. These are everyday people who start with little or nothing yet they somehow manage to identify, evaluate, and bring ideas to life in ways that benefit others and themselves. So, and this comes from a book that I co-wrote with Clifton Talbert in 2010 called Who Owns the Ice House? If you want to learn more about that, you can buy the book anywhere. You can buy books on Amazon or whatever. We have it in all different. And we just crossed the 100,000 copy threshold, which I'm learning is a big deal in the publishing world. And that was some support, initial support from the Kauffman Foundation we created into a curriculum. Now, I want this webinar to be a standalone value proposition for you. It's not dependent on our curriculum. I'm just telling you how we do it. Whether you want to use this curriculum or not is entirely up to you. It's very straightforward. We start with a simple redefinition of entrepreneurship. Get everybody on the same page in terms of the definition. Define it in a way anyone can embrace. We're going to introduce these 8 core competencies that we gleaned from these observations and analysis of everyday entrepreneurs. We want to immerse the learner in the opportunity discovery process, not the business planning process. Thank you very much. We want to expose them to relatable social models. Try to get them to identify and interact with local entrepreneurs in their community. And then we want to encourage personal reflection. What I mean by that is metacognition. We want the learner to think about their own thinking. That's really the important piece here. And then lastly, we want to encourage you to embrace a model of facilitation of discovery rather than subject matter expert. Look, here's the deal. You don't want to create, you're trying to foster and build the adaptive capacity of the individual, the capacity for self-direction, the capacity for a continuous learning, the capacity for adaptation, right? So we want to shift our role from subject matter expert that tends to foster a dependency on us and shift into a role of facilitator, the facilitator of discovery. So the redefinition, we've already talked about that. That's the starting point. Second thing, 8 core competency we've learned from the observations of entrepreneurs. Start with why. Choose the direction you want to go. Don't let your circumstances dictate. Solving problems for others is the path. Try lots of ideas. Learn, unlearn, and relearn all the time. Be resourceful. Be reliable. Surround yourself with other entrepreneurs and don't give up. That's the 30-second overview. There's so much meat on each one of those lessons. I could give a 2-hour seminar on each one of them and the science behind them. But them immersing in the opportunity discovery process using what we call the Ice House Opportunity Discovery Canvas. It's broken down into the problem finding phase, then to the problem solving phase. And then once there's evidence that the solution is being adopted, then we connect to the third phase, which is connecting and promoting the idea. Another important, really important part of our secret sauce is exposure to relatable social models. And in our curriculum, we have little video vignettes from a whole variety of underdog entrepreneurs who are sharing their experience as it relates to a particular subject matter in the curriculum. Then we want to also encourage personal reflection. Think about your own thinking. A mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to get the outcomes that it creates. And then again, as I said, embrace facilitation. And the key here is to embrace these principles of guided mastery that we borrowed from Albert Bandura. Start with small wins, whatever that might be, right? This is the zone of proximal development. You got to feel the bat hit the ball once so you start to believe that it's possible. expose the learner to relatable models, encourage mentorship and guidance from more experienced entrepreneurs, and then the ability to self-regulate, to think about your own thinking, to intervene on irrationally pessimistic beliefs or irrationally negative beliefs, and try to cultivate optimism, which is really the source of the resilience that enables us to persist. So, quick infomercial, the Ice House program, we launched it in 2011. It's gone all over the world. We've trained thousands of facilitators. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students have been enrolled in our programs, being taught in all different places we could possibly imagine, from middle school, high school, university, workforce development, career and technical education, community-based programs, workforce development, you name it. It's just kind of became a global phenomenon, right? And you know, we've got just dozens and dozens of testimonials for people who have talked about the training and how it's impacted their world. Don't want to get into that too much. What we offer to organizations and communities is basically keynotes and workshops are a way to expose a broad swath of a given group to the ideas, and that allows us to see who emerges as the early adopters. From there, we offer facilitator training, which is a much more in-depth version of what I'm talking about here, to learn how to cultivate these attitudes and skills in classrooms, organizations, and communities. We have a public online, so we do these trainings in person for specific organizations, be they academic organizations, nonprofit organizations, government institutions. We've done these all over
as
the
well
world.
as communities, as well as communities.
Thank you, Nick. And we also offer about 4 times a year a public facilitator training that we do online that allows people to come together from disparate sectors and places in the world to just kind of get a better feel for this. Our upcoming one starts very shortly, in just a little over a week. And I think there are some seats left for that, and Nick can have more information. I think we have a few seats left. We're not quite sold out yet.
Yes, I just dropped a link where you can see we have 2 more trainings, those public trainings Gary was talking about, open this year. We are still accepting registrations for our July training that does start in a little over a week on July 10th. It runs on Mondays from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we also have a training coming up in October, again on Mondays, again that 3 to 5 time slot. So you can see both of those options there, and we are accepting registrations for both. Though the July one, we did just send out the introductory email for that to get folks started. So if you are interested and you're able to join, make sure to sign up soon, just so that you're not falling behind.
Yep. Thank you, Nick. And then, so lastly, we offer leadership and organizational development, and we're moving more and more into that space, working with leaders of organizations to help them understand the distinction between solving technical problems and adaptive challenges. And that's where, in organizations, that's where the entrepreneurial mindset really shines. So that's who we are. That's what we do. That's a brief introduction to the Eli Ice House method. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. I'm going to stop sharing and see what questions you might have. I know we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Yes.
So
Thank you, Corey. Corey says, Who Owns the Ice House is a phenomenal read. And if you all have not read it yet, highly recommend. Corey, just so you know, that went to just Gary and I, but happy to read that out for everyone. Michael asked a question that I posted an answer, but I wanted Gary's take on it because it's an interesting one. So in my responses via chat, I was emphasizing the importance of agency in a lot of what we're talking about, be that individual or collective agency. And he asks, me have repeatedly emphasized agency. Is that a huge part of the entrepreneurial mindset?
It's everything.
I said in many ways it's the holy grail, because
that's but here, let me dig into that a little bit, Nick. What the literature is quite clear on is that our sense of agency is more important than our actual agency.
Yes.
So that's really what this is all about. What your questions are getting at, Michael, is that, you know, to me, this is about building the adaptive capacity for human flourishing.
Yes.
This is, you know, starting a business is but one way to manifest this, right? Not everyone wants to start a business, but we're all innately driven to become all that we can become. We all have the innate desire to be engaged in work that matters, to solve problems and to contribute to the group, to contribute to the greater good. Those are innate tendencies and desires that are in all of us. They're not just in some of us.
Yes.
And so that's how I think about the entrepreneurial mindset. This is about human flourishing.
Michael just put it really well. 99% advancement of the individual, 1% advancement of the venture. That's exactly right, Michael. Pursuing a venture, whether it's a business, an idea, and a existing business, a research project in school, what have you, whether that thing succeeds or fails is it's not even secondary. It's way farther below than what the individual is benefiting through going through these principles and practicing this. The agency that will be induced through the direct and deliberate practice of it is really our ultimate goal.
And for those of you who are interested in like ecosystem building, you know, let's use a sports analogy. What if professional baseball what if there was no baseball in childhood, in school, in after school programs? There was no baseball. We just expected, you know, A-Rod to show up out of nowhere, never having touched a baseball bat in his life, and start knocking him over the fence. That's a lot of our thinking around entrepreneurship is you think about that, how it equates to entrepreneurship, right? We're focusing all this attention and resources like looking for the next Zuckerberg, and we're overlooking all this latent entrepreneurial potential that lies in everyday ordinary people.
That's right. Michael brings up a good point to what you were just saying, Gary, which is the key question in ecosystem building is how to promote it in a specific region. So we can talk all day about the general, but
I got an answer for that. Like tap into the entrepreneurs that already exist in the community. Like the relatable social models are there. They're in communities from the smallest community to the largest community. They're entrepreneurial people, and 99 times out of 100, they are ready, willing, and eager to support younger, more nascent entrepreneurs. And we're not doing that. We're not tapping into that resource.
Right.
But also, you know, there's a broader point to be made here, Nick, and that is the humble improvised origins. Like, when we look at the data, what we see is that even companies like Hewlett-Packard, Waste Management, Microsoft, Walmart, Calvin Klein are started by inexperienced, unfunded entrepreneurs who initially set out pursuing these unidentifiable niche opportunities that are obvious to no one. Right? Hewlett-Packard's first product was a bowling machine apparatus, for goodness sakes. And so we have to keep that in mind. But more broadly, you know, we're enamored with the Silicon Valley narrative, and we're going to find another Elon Musk who's going to create thousands of jobs, and everybody else can just go back to this industrial era assumption that someone else is going to tell us what to learn and do in order to succeed in life. And I just don't think that's the way. The fundamental shift that has to happen from the macro perspective is we've got to shift from an external locus of value creation to an internal perceived locus of value creation. What we've got to recognize is the extent to which routinized, other directed learning and work, the outcome of that, the mindset that produces is people who come to think level 3 assume that someone else needs to tell me what to learn and do in order to be successful in life. And that's the fundamental thing that needs to change.
Oh, yes. Nigel mentioned this right near the beginning. Dr. Colin Jones has a definition of entrepreneurs that they see the invisible, which is really what we're talking about in lesson 2, opportunity. Once you've chosen a compelling goal, once you've chosen to change the circumstances that you live in, you start setting out to find opportunities and redefine problems as opportunities. That's really what that invisible thing is. There's opportunities literally everywhere. We just often are taught not to see them.
Well, and I want to dig into your comment, Nigel. It's very, very important because you're getting at something that's easily overlooked. What entrepreneurs are doing, and they don't know they're doing it, is they're tapping into their imagination.
Yes.
Rather than drawing from the memory to create the future, they're imagining something in their mind that never was.
Yes.
And I would encourage you to read a paper, Nigel, written by Martin Seligman and others called Navigating the Past, driven by the past or navigating the future. But the point is that's so important in your comment, Nigel, is that that's the distinction. That is the mindset distinction right there. When we imagine something, when there's something compelling in the future that we're striving towards, we wind up, that enables our brains to access problem-solving abilities that are otherwise not available to us. So I want to make sure that that Dr. Colin Jones's comments aren't construed as some mystical ability. There's a cognitive thing that's happening here that's repeatable. They're breaking from the past, where most of us just make decisions by drawing into the prefrontal cortex and the memory and using that to navigate the future. And it's the imagination that enables us to break from the past.
To Michael's point,
many
inventors are seeing, thank you, Homo Prospectus takes the idea of that paper that Gary was just mentioning and goes further. Inventors are finding an opportunity that is either underutilized or unutilized, but they are not necessarily being innovators. It's the action piece. And that's why if you can tell, we clearly are very steeped and interested in the psychology of this and the anthropology of it. But many people will say entrepreneurship is a word that's getting in the way because people have a limited belief of it. Absolutely understand that point, but entrepreneurs are those that act.
Well, and to dig into that even further, Nick, it's the action. So there's a compelling goal, and that compelling goal has to serve others. It can't just be a self-serving goal, because you won't tap into the motivation that you need to endure. Number one.
Hence the second sentence of our definition of entrepreneurship. It's creating value for others to empower yourself as well.
It's an altruistic paradox.
It has to be both. Yes.
But the point that I want to make here, Nick, is so you're striving towards something in your imagination that doesn't yet exist, or at least it doesn't exist in your life. That's why the action orientation, because it's micro experimentation that enables the entrepreneur to see the invisible. Because that's why I'm so against business planning, because the data don't exist.
That's right.
So it's the action step is this micro experimentation. How do organisms orient themselves in unfamiliar terrain? They make lots of small bets. They try lots of little things until they find something that works. That's the entrepreneur way. It's not about making a big, bold bet, about going all in on an unproven idea.
All right, Michael has a good follow-on question, but I'm also seeing that we're 5 minutes over the scheduled time. So for those who would like to stay on, we'll continue the conversation for a few more minutes, but feel free to hop off. We're still recording, and I will send the recording out within about 24 hours of the presentation. So if you need to jump, no worries at all.
Yeah.
But Michael asks a very good, important question, because to me, it's akin to an issue of task switching within a column of transformation theory. That is, I struggle with the cognitive allocation between imagination and alertness. Is it parallel processing or serial shifting task to task?
Don't know. I've never given that a bit of thought. I honestly don't know.
So maybe I think you have, but maybe we can put it into terms that we normally speak in.
There is an alertness. I mean, so the entrepreneur is now behaving like an indoor cat that just became an outdoor cat.
Right.
Right. So you've got a sharp stick and some baling wire, and you're out in the world. There's a lot of things that can kill you.
His point is, how much time are you taking to envision, to use your imagination, versus going out with the sharp stick and acting? Or are you imagining at the same time that you are acting?
Yeah.
That's his question.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that.
It honestly, it depends on the situation.
Well, like, how desperate are you?
Exactly my point. If you're a desperation entrepreneur, that's a different situation than if you are someone who is tinkering on the side while you have a sustainable day job.
I think the other point to be gleaned from Michael's comment is, like, go back to the Sarasvati stuff. It's effectual reasoning. You have to go in order to know. And people get all caught up. I just put a podcast episode up there. I have a podcast. I interview these entrepreneurs, and I interviewed this young guy, Steve Orlando, who was a former student of mine, like 15 years ago or something like that. I don't know. How long ago was that, Nick? 2006, however many years that is. I'm convinced increasingly that your original idea almost doesn't matter. And that was the name of the podcast. The ideas don't matter. Yes. Like, if you get out in the world and you're aggressively acting and trying to solve a problem, and you're showing up and you're knocking on doors and you're talking to people, invariably someone's going to say, well, I don't really that's not really my problem. This is my problem. Can you solve that? So I think that's part of the question you're asking, like how long do you think versus how long do you act?
Yes.
It's the action orientation. I think the more important idea here is that the hope circuit in the brain is open. And to be clear, what we're advocating writ large is, do not quit your day job. Do not drop out of school. Do not mortgage your house. Do not take on significant financial risk. Keep doing what you're doing and carve out some small modicum of time and space and effort to explore new ways to make yourself more useful to more humans in the margin. And we use this thing we call the Ice House $5 challenge. Find a friend, maybe a teenage kid, if you have teenage kids, figure out how to turn $5 into $50 in your spare time by making yourself useful. Mm-hmm. Impose that resource constraint, right? Mm-hmm. And when you get to $50, stop and look around and see how you can turn the 50 into 500. When you get to 500, go to 5,000. And by now your mindset is starting to change irrevocably.
Absolutely. Okay, well, now that we are 10 minutes over the scheduled time, thank you for those who stuck around. Thank you for anyone who's watching this in the future. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Gary or I You'll get an email from me within about 24 hours of the session ending. But again, thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thanks for the great conversation, guys. Hope
Yes.
to see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.